Hello, this is Mr. Henry. Welcome to lesson 6.2. Today we are looking at writing and solving proportions. So today's essential question is, how do I write and solve proportions? Okay. So first off, we have vocabulary word. What is a proportion? Well, what a proportion is, it's an equation. But it's an equation showing that two ratios are equal. Having trouble writing today. An equation showing that two ratios are equal. Okay, that's what a proportion is. An equation showing that two ratios are equal. Okay, and we're going to learn two different methods for solving a proportion. So this is a proportion. Notice that this side over here looks like a ratio, a fraction sort of. This side over here looks like a ratio, but it's missing a piece. And we're going to find out what that missing piece is. Now the first method we can use is called equivalent ratios. And the way that this works is you look for a pattern in the problem. Now here when I look at this, I see, if I took 8 times 2, I would get 12. So if I take this first ratio and times by 2, I will get the second ratio. So to find my x, I take my 15 times 2 equals x. Well, 15 times 2 is 30. So that means that x equals 30. That was pretty simple. And I do call this the easy way, but it doesn't work all the time. It only works sometimes. Okay? Letter B, same thing. Look for a pattern. Well, from this number to that number, I would have to, in this case, divide by 2. 18 divided by 2 is 9. So if I took 3 divided by 2, I would get y. Now, if you have a calculator there with you, do 3 divided by 2, and the answer you should get is y equals 1.5. And you are allowed to have decimals here. For a while now, we've only been dealing with fractions and staying with fractions. You are allowed to have a decimal answer. So that would be complete and correct. Okay? Let's look at letter C. Now, letter C, same idea. I want you to look for a pattern. The problem will be 5 over 7 equals 20 over G. 5 over 7 equals 20 over G. I would like you to pause the video, do the problem, and hit play when you're ready to continue. Alright, so let's see. Hopefully the pattern you found, if you took 5 times 4, you would get 20. That means if you take 7 times 4, you'll get that variable. This whole thing times 4 equals this whole thing. So 20 over G equals 28. And that's done. And that is what is called the equivalent ratios method. I call it the easy way. It works good if you don't have a calculator, but it doesn't work for every single problem. For example, if you look at example 2a here, solving the problem using algebra. Well, we're not going to use algebra. But is there a pattern here? Can you multiply this to get that or this to get that? No, it doesn't work. So that easy method, the equivalent ratios method, doesn't work here. This only works sometimes. Now, I'm not going to show the algebra method because honestly, I don't like it. It's not so good. So I'm going to cross off algebra, and we're actually going to cross multiply. If you know how to cross multiply, you'll be good for every single proportion problem you'll ever do. So, let's do cross multiply. To cross multiply, what you do is you take your 10 times 12, your 15 times C. Well, 10 times 12 is 120. 15 times C is 15C. Now, this is an itsy-bitsy little one-step equation. And if you remember from many chapters back, the way you solve this is if this says 15 times C, you have to do the opposite. You have to divide by 15. Divide by 15. And when you do that, C equals 8. 120 divided by 15 equals 8. And on this side, the 15s cancel out. That is the same method you'll do for every single proportion problem using cross-multiply. I don't care how it's set up, what numbers are there, what it looks like. You multiply the diagonals here, multiply the diagonals there, and then divide by the number that's being multiplied by the variable every single time, which is why I like it. It's always the same. Well, let's see another example. 21 times 6, that's 126. 14 times x, 14x. Now, to get the x by itself, you have to divide by 14. Divide by 14. These cancel out, and x equals 9. And I do have these done ahead of time, but 126 divided by 14 equals 9. And you do that using a calculator or off to the side of your paper, something like that. Calculators do come in handy this chapter. Okay, so let's look at letter C. Letter C, we have, and this one I want you to do on your own and then come back when you're ready to check. 5 over 8 equals x over 6. I want you to cross multiply, solve, do, hit play when you are ready to continue. Alright, so let's see how you did. Hopefully, you multiplied these two and got 30. Multiplied those two, got 8x. And then you divide by 8, and you go, Mr. Henry, it doesn't come out right. Well, it does. It just doesn't come out to a nice, pretty number. You should get the answer of 3.75, and that is correct. That's what you should get. Okay? So this is the cross-multiply method. That is definitely the preferred method. Okay? So, summary point writing. What is the process you go through to solve a problem using, not algebra, cross-multiply? I want you to take a second, and I want you to answer that sentence. What is the process you go through to solve a problem using cross-multiply? If you can answer that sentence, it means you understand the lesson. If not, you might want to restart the lesson from here. Okay? So what is the process you go through to solve a proportion using cross-multiply? Well, the answer I would put would be multiply the diagonals, and then you divide by the number next to the variable. Multiply diagonals, divide by the number next to the variable. Multiply the diagonals, divide by the number next to the variable. That is the process you go through every single time. Okay? Now, example 3, I have little word problems that they are proportion problems. You're going to use proportions to solve them. So it says here, a car can go 600 yards in 12 seconds. How far can it go in 15 seconds? Well, that's not too bad. One good thing about proportions is every single problem is read pretty much the same. You always have a first thing it gives you all the information. 600 yards in 12 seconds. Please include your units. That's going to be very, very important, and you'll see why. 600 yards in 12 seconds. How far can it go in 15 seconds? Well, that 15 seconds has to line up with this 12 seconds. The units have to line up. So if you have yards, yards, seconds, seconds. If you had miles, you'd have miles. They have to match up going across. That's how you know you set it up right. Missing piece, variable. And then from here you cross multiply again. So 15 times 600, 9,000. 12 times x is 12x. And divide by the number next to the variable. Divide by 12, divide by 12. X equals 750. So if you could go 600 yards in 12 seconds, you can go 750 yards in 15 seconds. Okay. Again, the setup, not too bad. The first sentence is always going to be your first ratio. The second sentence is going to be your second ratio. There will usually be a missing piece. Letter B here says a baker could make 4 sandwiches with 15 slices of meat. How many slices would be needed for 6 sandwiches? Okay, first sentence. 4 sandwiches with 15 slices of meat. 4 sandwiches, 15 meat. Notice I have my units. I'm keeping them separate. Why? Because my units have to match up over here. So I read the second sentence now. It says, how many slices would be needed for 6 sandwiches? 6 sandwiches. That means your variable goes down here. You cross multiply. You get a 4x. You get a 90. And then to get the variable by itself, you divide both sides by the number next to the variable, and x equals 22.5. That is cross multiply. Okay? So, let's recap the lesson. The equivalent ratios method, you solve by finding a pattern. So, times by 2, times by 2. Or divide by 2, divide by 2. You find some way to change the first ratio into the second. To solve using cross multiply, you multiply the diagonals, and then you'll always divide by the number next to the variable because you want the variable to be by itself. And you'll see that worked no matter which problem we did. Finally, down in example 3, when we were writing and solving, the first ratio is almost always going to come from the first sentence. It says a car can go 600 yards in 12 seconds. So you write 600 yards, 12 seconds. And then the second sentence is your second ratio. How far can it go in 15 seconds? 15 seconds, and your units must match up going across. If you do that, you will never get it wrong. Okay? This has been lesson 6.2. I hope to see you in the next lesson.